Happy May Day, everyone. May Day, May Day, May Day is the call that we've always heard in movies for distress. It was originally from the French word midday, or pardon my pronunciation if it's not perfect, but that was how the French pronounced the word help or close to it. And I thought May Day, May 1, was an appropriate time for us to address May Day type situations with this master class. And what we're going to look at today is the multi-day crisis. We've had a lot of those in the news. I always want to timestamp the master classes because they're also available later on demand. So today is May 1, May Day of 2023. So everything we're going to share with you today is based on best practices and my beliefs and the beliefs of our guests as they stand on this day at this point in time. I want to thank our sponsors for today, in addition to sponsorship from Situation Hub. The National Association of Chemical Distributors is a co-sponsor, as well as Exxon, who is a major underwriter of business insurance for corporations. We will have some special discounts at the end of the program for NACD members and Exxon members. So stick around for promises of bonuses and good deals. My name, in case you've never met me, is Jared Bro. My background is practicing crisis communication since 1994. My first career was as a journalist from 1997 to 1994. And the reason I left journalism is, first of all, it's a grinding career. I loved what I did. I thoroughly enjoyed it. The business side of life wasn't good, nor is it fun to work on all of the major holidays when you can't be with your family. So I left there, and my first intention was helping people be better spokespeople. So I started a media training company because for 15 years, people would say crazy things to me on TV. And I thought somebody needs to train them not to do that. So I set up that business, which then evolved into more crisis communications. And in 2020, we launched the Situation Hub software company, which is the only app in the world that can write a news release for you automatically in under 3 minutes and give you something that your lawyers will quickly approve and something that will move at the speed of social media. So that is what I've been working on in the past few years. Our guest today is going to be Russ Roberts. Russ is formerly with ExxonMobil. Russ had a career very similar to me. In 1985, he started out as a TV reporter and ended his career in 1994. He and I worked together at WDSU in New Orleans. He left television and went to work for El Paso Energy. And then after El Paso, he went to work for ExxonMobil. And the stories he's going to share with us today are based on some of the huge multi-day crises he managed for ExxonMobil. Currently, he does the same thing I do. He retired from both TV and his corporate job at ExxonMobil, and he is a media trainer, and he helps with crisis communications drills. Russ was going to originally be here live. We had to pre-record it because a crisis communications drill got scheduled for today, but you will be able to hear Russ's interview in its entirety. Our objectives on all of our master classes from Situation Hub is to share best practices with you. We always want to have higher level thinking and share with you the very best practices. And we wanted to establish a community for learning. We want to make sure that you are perpetually learning something new and sharing best practices. As we get into today, one of the things that we always look at is we want to really dig down into the idea that a crisis can be defined as any event that can damage your revenue, reputation, and brand. Damage your revenue, reputation, and brand. We have people on the call today from 3 different continents, from I think 10 different countries, as well as a lot of states in the United States and provinces in Canada, and a lot of people in public relations are there. I want to emphasize for everybody in public relations, stop talking about brand and reputation and start talking more about revenue, because when you focus on the revenue damage, executives realize, wow, this can be costly if we don't prepare and if we don't do this right. The next thing we want to do is dig into some of the things that have been happening that are multi-day crises that are in the news. Again, I said today is May 1, 2023. We've had 2 to 3 really huge catastrophic train derailments in the news in the past few days that have been, or in the past few weeks, that have been those multi-day horrible crises. Also, we've had workplace shootings and school shootings beyond what I can even imagine. The frequency has just gotten scary. To that extent, let me digress for a moment and say on May 25th, we're going to have a master class that deals with workplace and school shootings. I'll send more information to you by email on that. We've had lots of tornadoes this spring. Winter storms continue deep into the spring, and then hurricane season starts in a month. All of those are examples of multi-day crises. The Mississippi River is on the rise from melting snow, so you're going to have weeks of flooding stories. We've had a lot of fires and explosions in the news lately, as well as chemical spills and oil spills. And the stories we're going to deal with today are along the lines of those oil spills. Our guest today is Russ Roberts. We've pre-recorded Russ. I am going to go into that interview, and then we will open it up for questions and answers after our interview with Russ. So joining us today is Russ Roberts. Russ and I have known each other since the 1980s. Both of us had similar careers in television. We worked together at WDSU in New Orleans, but if I remember correctly, Russ, you worked in Little Rock before that and then Houston after that, right?
That's absolutely correct.
And then, like me, you just got fed up with television. There's only so much of the day-to-day grind you can take. And like me, you moved into public relations. And one of those places where you ended up was at ExxonMobil. Give us a little background of what you did in your 20 years at ExxonMobil.
Sure. So I started out with the media background that I had. The first 8 or 10 years were dealing with media relations, both at the site level all the way up through the corporate level, working with the CEOs and the top level folks at the corporate offices. And then the career shifted slightly and went more into the external relations with communities and stakeholders and government officials when I was over the operations, still doing public and government affairs, but more of an operations focus at our U.S. refineries and chemical plants, and then most of our pipeline and transmission operations all the way through the final stage was working from Alaska to Argentina, as I say, covering all the continents, all the operations for ExxonMobil from a public and government affairs standpoint for the Americas. And that's where that last stop was. And enjoyed all 20 years of it. So about 12 in TV and about 20 in the corporate world. And I decided it was time to do what I loved. And that was to coach and to train and to help people be better communicators and storytellers. And that's what I do now as a consultant.
Excellent. So I'll put your contact information in the notes. That way, if people want to follow up with you, they can. Our focus today is the long-term crisis. And you had 2 of them that were really headline making crises. So many of our folks who are on the call, on the master class, are used to an event that lasts for a couple of hours. Maybe it lasts for a day, maybe it lasts for a news cycle. You had these multi-day events, and I'm going to say for disclosure that I know that you're a very ethical person and you're going to adhere to any legal agreements you have from your previous employer, not to answer things that you shouldn't answer. So you have permission to say, if I told you, I'd have to kill you. We'll play that rule today. If I ask anything, you shouldn't. But one of the things we want to dig into for everybody on the master class today is how to deal with those news conferences over multiple days when multiple agencies are involved. This is often referred to as a JIC, a Joint Information Command. And in your case, working for an oil company, you would have the Environmental Protection Agency, you would have state and local authorities in the environmental realm, you'd have law enforcement in there, wildlife experts, and so it's a lot of moving parts with a lot of people who touch little pieces of this crisis. So we're going to look at 2 of them today. Your first one, congratulations, was in the Yellowstone River. It's like if I had to write a headline of something that I wouldn't wish on anyone, oil spill in Yellowstone River, or as some of the news sources call it, massive oil spill in Yellowstone River. So for disclosure, from what I'm able to find on the web, you had a pipeline, or the company you were associated with had a pipeline that ran under the Yellowstone River. And because of external circumstances caused by a massive storm that caused a bunch of stuff to happen upriver, you guys had a pipeline break, but nonetheless, your name's on the pipeline and yours the cleanup. So tell us what you can about that event and how it transpired.
Sure. So this was 2011, July, I think it was. And at that time, I did have the Americas operations responsibility. And our refinery was just north of where this location was. So you get the phone call late in the evening that this has occurred. All the possible things that you think of are probable. It's all happening. And the interesting thing is, you said, which I think I want to put for context to start with, we knew it was Yellowstone River, about 100, 125 miles away from Yellowstone National Park. However, as both former media people, we prefer to call it a spill in Yellowstone National Park, which gets much more media attention. Not at all true, very industrial area, but nonetheless, that was the original media push. Major company spills oil in National Park. Okay, so that's how we started. Big storm, lots of flooding. It was a Mother Nature event of sorts, but the things that happened created that pipeline to break. And unfortunately, it went for some period of time before we were able to shut in on both sides. Not a huge spill, but in an active river in Yellowstone National Park, it was all hands on. And when I say that, our responsibility, we had help from every potential agency you can imagine, every politician that you can imagine, every official who you can imagine, all wanting to show leadership and push the big company to do the right thing, which we did. But in those situations, it's difficult when they're pulling levers before you're ready to have them pull from a response standpoint. So we'll talk today, I'm pretty sure, about the actual response, which was not as much of my responsibility as the interaction with the public and the officials for the reputational and the revenue piece of what this problem was causing us.
So you guys are used to practicing to mobilize response teams fast. Tell us a little bit about that initial incident command response, but then if you would transition into the communications response, the crisis communications, public relations aspect.
At a company our size, we were Fortune 5 at that time. I think we were 1 or 2. We had a North America regional response team, and that's a massive group of highly trained experts and team members across the corporation who volunteer to be part of these response efforts. So when the word comes in that there's a breach and the pipeline company called it in, we got confirmation public relations from our Billings refinery close by. The activation numbers go out, and there's a whole process for that to happen. People have their go kits, they're on planes, they're in cars, they're going that direction. Our corporate headquarters is in Texas. This is in Montana. So it's not an easy trek. So a lot of time just traveling causes challenges to get there, but we're multinational, we're across the US. Once you get everyone to the site, you establish a location, you start to put the command center together, you establish a command leader. While that's happening, simultaneously, the public relations teams gathering information, using our pre-approved materials to try to put templates together to get information out, just to try to stay up with what's already being reported. If there's any good news, it was in the evening, and it was during a storm, so there wasn't a lot of visibility at that point yet. So we were able to use the clock to our advantage to travel in that direction, but not too many flights to Montana at 3 o'clock in the morning. So we were on the first one out, 6 a.m., I think it is, from Houston, landing somewhere around the 10 a.m. frame, about a 25, 30-minute drive to as close as we could get. So for time purposes, you're looking at 8 hours from the time we were notified, packed our bags, got to the airport, and actually arrived as a small team. We're talking 5 to 7 members of an immediate strike team with others ready to come on call.
Tell us a little bit about the cascading process of issuing the first holding statement, and then how long before you were able to get that out, followed by other statements. You and I practice the belief of having pre-written statements. In my case, because I've built Situation Hub, it's now a library of hundreds of pre-written statements that are easy to customize. But you had, of course, Situation Hub wasn't invented at the time. You had paper. Tell me about those paper documents, because I used to live and die by paper documents as well. Tell us a little bit about what those templates look like, and then how fast you were able to get them out to the media and to local stakeholders.
So I'll go in reverse order. How fast was, an evening event? We had things out late morning the next morning when the word was, people began to see oil. So 10 to noon, 10 to 2 o'clock the following day, I would say, is about the first time we got it out into the media. No one knew about it. We weren't getting inquiries, so we were able to gather. We had what we called a red book at the time. It's now an application on your phone that you can dig into, but sectioned much like you have yours, by crisis, by event, by a spill, oil, chemical product, and you basically flip to those pages, and there's a pre-written template that has blanks. The difficulty there is you have to recreate it on a computer, even though it's in a template, or you find the template and fill it in. That's just a process unto itself to go get that done. Within reason, we had it out within an hour or two once we actually actively started working on it, working with our contact there in Montana, who had access to the press, was able to take phone calls, had been trained to do that, had people on site who could be on and aware. So I always try to look for the good in things. And in this case, 20 minutes, 20 miles or so from an incident space with our own people is much better than in the middle of our second event we'll talk about, where we had no one and many people live there. In this case, industrial area, not many folks, downriver, some farms and some cattle ranches and things like that, but not a huge personal impact, but a larger environmental impact.
When I look at crisis communications and I look at the pain points, the problems and the predicaments, I always see multiple stages where things get held up. Number one, can I get information as a PR person about the event from my teams in the field? Secondly, how fast can I create a statement? But then after I've done my Pulitzer Prize winning statement, I send it off for approval and it gets bogged down in the Netherlands of either wordsmithing, fighting over commas, fighting over semantics, or someone who's got too many hats on and just won't stop to look at it. Tell us a little bit about the process you had. Then did you face any of those pain points that so many people face every time there's an incident?
I'll start with the fact that every major incident has a lot of extra layers to it. So the lawyers are critically important because the event is the event, but the aftermath is what caused the reputational and the revenue problems. So they play a vital role. And my advice is to anyone in our field, become closely tied to your lawyer team. Help them understand what your goals are and that they're not actually opposed to theirs, because there's oftentimes that friction between the two. The operations people move pretty quickly. It's the legal team that really takes the extra time because they know they'll be fighting the aftermath, the lawsuits, the problems, all the damages. That can take time. It was the legal team at our company that actually pre-approved many of the documents. In fact, all the statements within the documents in our Red Book. So that gave us the first 2 to even 3 statements out that could be pushed through quickly. But again, that was work from our team as a public relations function, working with the law function to be sure that we could find a way to meet both groups' needs and get something out there in the public. Now, this is 2011, Jared. This isn't 2023 when the golden hour was really an hour, and now it's not. It's more like a golden minute. So you have to move much faster than you did then. So there was still time to work that. It's a different world now, and moving more quickly, you really need to be ahead of the game and think 2 steps ahead of where the next announcement's going to come from the press, or someone with a video is going to show something that you didn't expect to see that quickly out there in the public. Yeah,
that's an excellent point. With lawyers, the thing that they're concerned about is, will you fuel plaintiff's attorney? And what I'll remind everybody of is my rule is fast, factual, no fluff. So the media wants to know who, what, when, where, why, and how. So those are just facts that a lawyer won't even dispute if it's the time, it's the address, et cetera, where they really get into the nuance of really needing to manage the messaging, and where all of us in public relations and management need to manage those messages is when it comes to the why and the how, the importance of not speculating, the importance of having in your templates sentences that deflect speculation. And I know even with Situation Hub, the lawyers we deal with in the companies love it because we have sentences built in that says it would be inappropriate to speculate on the cause. Let's wait for an investigation to tell us what happened, and how we keep it from happening again. And then in media training, we go back and what I now call a retreat and retreat to that sentence and repeat that sentence. And that will get you much faster approval, I find, with lawyers when you have that relationship and they're confident that you're not going to speculate and feel plaintiff's attorney.
Yeah. Well, you and I both know it's a dance, right? We were reporters, so we want to know the how and the why. The companies don't have that, so they can only tell you the what, the facts. And that's that dance in between. Where do you land? And speculation is never on the table, whether you're trained to or not to. You just don't do it.
Right.
In some of the cases, it's always how much oil, how much chemical, how much emissions were released. And you just don't know early on. And you have a window of time with the press. The first question is, are people harmed and what should they know? But that's so quickly passes. Now it's what happened and why it happened. And then it becomes, how could you let it happen? And what else could happen? And it just continues to snowball. And we made our living doing that. And now we have to help folks understand that's their mindset. They're not angry. They're not mean. They're just coming after what they think their readers want. And we have to be able and prepared to quickly help them understand that's not where we are right now. Here's what I can tell you. And here's what we do know. And we'll come back shortly thereafter and tell you some more once we get more information.
I agree. So let's transition to now you have to set up the Joint Information Command. You've got all these politicians and regulatory agencies flocking in to micromanage and oversee what you're doing. Each of them has their own interest. Tell us what it's like, because my rule in every crisis communications plan I write, I have an entire chapter set up for the Joint Information Command. And my rule is if my company caused the event or is responsible, if they own the event, then I want to lead the JIC and I invite the agencies in. Whereas if it's a natural disaster and I'm one of 20 companies that were affected, like with a hurricane or a tornado, then a federal or state agency will stand up the JIC and I will participate in their JIC. So in your case, my protocol would be you stand up the JIC, you invite the agencies into your JIC. Tell us what you did and how you did it.
So in this case, we did own the pipeline, and it was our responsibility to respond. So we do set up the Crisis Command Center, and then Joint Information Command comes in, and we take charge and oversee that. Lessons learned are always helpful, right? So when you feel responsible for something, you can take personal, emotional ownership of that. And sometimes those emotions can overtake the logic and the way to approach. So that's a nice way of saying there were some disagreements between how we chose to approach it and how the EPA chose to approach it. And at certain points, we took actions that they felt were confrontational. And they took the position that if that's how this is going to go, we have an EPA, we have a waterway near a national park. We're going to wrest control of this now, and we will now take over the JIC. And that's happened with other companies before, where there's a bit of an interaction challenge. The government then takes over. That's not a position you want to find yourself in, because it is a joint information command. It's not a single. So while we as a company feel ownership to do it ourselves and don't want a lot of help, that's tenable position to be in when they feel like you've caused a problem to our environment. We regulate what you can and can't do. Therefore, you need to allow us to be part of this. So I emphasize joint to be a joint. In this case, we started the first portion of it as a joint, and then at one point we lost control. They took over. They ran the press conferences. They were inviting us in some cases to those press conferences. Weren't many. This wasn't a long event, but we did have a challenge, and we finally got back into the groove with them and settled the waters and made it a little, no pun intended, but got it worked out where we were agreeable and began to, we always worked jointly. It was just a difference of opinion about what was to go first and where the emphasis was. And it can quickly, you can quickly lose control. Ultimately, it's our responsibility to manage the reputational and revenue impacts. Unfortunately, the government doesn't care as much about that as they do about the actual incident, which we did as well. But the aftermath, as you've said before, is really on us, because 6 months, 2 years, 10 years later, government's written a report. They've had a committee hearing. They're finished with it. We still answer questions about, how'd you guys spill oil in Yellowstone National Park? Well, actually, we didn't. But and you can take it from there on how that story goes. The anniversary stories, the annual stories are all there. So to kind of come back around, the JIC is critical. You get all the resources, you get all the expertise, you get validation that you're actually doing it properly, but you have to make sure you jointly follow that if you find yourself in a large situation where you want to take control, but you really need to share.
One of the lessons learned that I'll share with the audience here, one of the takeaways is the importance of doing drills and inviting agencies in. Now, in your case, Russ, you were going off to Montana, so you didn't necessarily know the individuals who would be responding regionally, et cetera. I work with a number of nuclear power plants, and we go so far as to have 8 drills a year. For 4 of those drills, we bring in state and federal officials, as well as local, county, municipal, parish officials, and everybody sits at a news conference. And we really drill home the idea of don't talk about it unless you own it, and know when to defer to someone else. And I think the Coast Guard is probably the best organization that I've ever watched running a JIC, because they really practice that. If you don't own it, don't talk about it. So was that also part of your experience? Did your people understand the rule of if you don't own it, don't talk about it?
Absolutely. An incident known as Exxon Valdez is part of the reason why many of the response procedures in ExxonMobil are set up the way they are. And every year, every other year, we go back to Valdez in person and invite all of the local federal agencies, and we do a recreation, not of that event, but of potentially the same kinds of events where we practice exactly that. You own it, you speak about it, you don't, you practice press conferences, you have injects, you do all of the actual iteration. You've got Coast Guard people there, you've got all of the folks that would be at a major incident involved. So drilling is critical. We do practice that. And because we had done that, and many of the members of the North America Regional Response Team were part of those drills when we were in the JIC in Montana, like riding a bike, all those skills came back. We fell right into where we should have fallen into. As again, the problem I said was the emotional ownership of it caused some friction in how the prioritization of how you handled and responded was where the problems began. That'll always be the issue. You've got to find a controversy to find a compromise, right? So within both, you will have to figure it out. And I think that's where we, slightly made a bit of a turn. And I don't fault us for that. I mean, we don't like to spill anything. No one does. And when you do, you feel responsible. You want to do it your way. You want to do it the best. And sometimes when others have a different priority list, it can cause some friction. And that's just part of life. But when you are in a joint situation, you just have got to put those aside and really try to work to the best good of the people and those that are affected as a result of what happened.
Absolutely. So let's go back to, you mentioned a red book. The people who know me know that my belief is when I help them write a crisis communications plan, I am not making a list of things you might want to consider. I am creating a chronological list of things that you should do and in the order that you should do them, assigning tasks to key individuals, telling them how to do that task, where to find their resources, what their logins are, if they have a Twitter account, how to tweet, if they have a website that they need to post. It's very detailed. I've also been able to automate what used to be the first 4 chapters of my plan are all now automated in Situation Hub. So for example, the plans used to ask you to gather information about the event, and in the old days, I had nearly 60 questions, 4 pages of information. I would manually make people do it pencil and paper. Now it's all done in the app and it automatically writes the news release. But the fact is, once you've done those handful of steps, then I still have a plan for executing. You had the red book. Tell us about the red book, and at what point does everybody instinctively know this is our trusted manual, as opposed to people running in and suddenly trying to wing it?
Sure. So this will be different than 2 incidents we're talking about. In my time in running the operations for public affairs at one of our Gulf Coast refineries, we had an actual incident. It was a tower release of some kind due to a compressor failure and a fire. And as we are getting together in the shift superintendent's room and all the key players are there, you get these young, very smart engineers coming up with great ideas of how to do things. And the very senior site manager quietly watching this, very tolerant for us for a moment. As I was being part of that group, not injecting, because I'm not an engineer with a lot of great ideas, they were, and they were having some wonderful conversations about what should be done immediately. I turn and I see him, he's on top of his chair and he's throwing this red book down on top of the table, slam. The room goes quiet. He says, "Follow the damn plan. You built it in peacetime, follow it in crisis. No time for cowboys to be coming up with new ideas." And, he's in his late 50s. He's had a full career. He knows this. He's done all of these things. And then his future replacements are in that room vying for the right ideas. Quiet, couldn't hear a thing. They immediately went to the book, got things started. We didn't lose but maybe 10 minutes, but it was a good lesson for me as a bit of an outsider, but for all of them to realize, listen, you put these plans together when you have a clear head and a clear mind and you're thinking with time. But when that stress of a crisis starts, you really need to separate the emotional from the logical and just go as the plan tells you to. And that's how you keep people safe in the field, because when a unit of any kind is in distress, if you will, and they need to make quick decisions, all those have been pre-thought through in that plan. So as you said, follow the plan. The red book we carried was much smaller, wouldn't make as much noise if you threw it down on the table, but the same thought process goes there. All of what you talked about was built into that book: checklists, prioritization, order at which you attack things, as well as templates, suggested talking points. It's all in there.
Awesome. Let's go to your second crisis. This one was also bizarre, caused by external events. And would it be fair to say oil filled a neighborhood and some houses?
So this is Mayflower, Arkansas. It's just a short distance from the state capitol, where you have a room and a building full of politicians more than happy to help and to weigh in on your situation. This one was unique, not like the Yellowstone, where it was in a river and an industrial area. This was in the middle of a small neighborhood in Mayflower, Arkansas, an underground pipeline that was breached. And fortunately for the residents and for their insurance companies, they had their cell phones as they videotaped oil running down the curb lines on one street. So imagine a rectangle And there are 5 streets and 20 houses or so on each side of each street, times 5, so 100 houses, all in this one area. One very clearly impacted, going into the drain system, into the sewer pipes, into what was Conway Lake, or what is Lake Conway at the time. And then the other house is beginning to smell and see. So this was in the daytime, March of 2013, I think it was. And very visible, right? So unlike the other one where it was at nighttime with a big storm, this was in the middle of the day. Many folks at home during the day working shifts or just not working at all. And it was right there in front of everyone to see. The media helicopters from the state capitol, where I used to work in Arkansas, were a drive away or a helicopter ride away. And we had media within the first 15 minutes. So this one we found out through that. It was less of we had pipeline pressure issues where we were able to detect there was a problem, but the media was far ahead of us on this one.
Right. So how fast were you able to start getting your statements out for this one? And tell me the process of standing up your Joint Information Command Center.
So in this one, no office in the area of Little Rock. We had pipelines, so we worked on our pipeline company. Again, transmission of crude coming through the area. We used our team in Houston to gather information as best we could from the pipeline company, from media reports, from others that we could get to the site, contractors that were close by, and put out a holding statement, not a news release, but a holding statement showing awareness that there was an issue, not knowing many details, but we were heading to the location to address. That one, I don't recall where I was. I just know before I knew it, I was back on an airplane again. We didn't get the entire group pushed us because we didn't know that much about this one. We couldn't get as many people there as quickly as we could. But this one lasted more than a month. I think we got it behind on this one simply because it was so close to the Capitol, 3 TV stations, the media got ahead of it. And we really had to work quickly from our Dallas and Houston office to get information out there. And we balanced, but I think we started behind the 8 ball this time.
I want to go back and emphasize to everybody that power of a holding statement. In Situation Hub, the users know it as the A1 first critical statement. But I've long said that an organization has the ability to issue a statement when you know almost nothing, that says we know something, but we lack all of the details, but we're on it. When you and I were reporters, there are so many case studies when I'm giving a presentation somewhere that I go into these case studies where it's 3 and 4 hours before anything gets said by the company. And it just drives me absolutely nuts. I can now use Situation Hub to write a holding statement in 90 seconds and in one button, publish it to the web. So talk a little bit more about your company's philosophy of using those holding statements and what it does to fill the void in the news cycle.
We want to be part of that conversation, and you're never going to know all the answers to every question a reporter can come up with, because in reality, that reporter is just finding out about it as you as a company are most likely. And on their way, you and I know this, they're jotting questions down as they drive hurriedly to get to wherever the location is. And they're forming questions in a potential story in their head before they've even seen anything. So a holding statement gets your contact information, your name, your company, your response out there so that you can be part of the conversation and you don't get the dreaded, we reached out to company, but there was no one available to give us a comment. That's what we tried to avoid. We wanted to be available for some things so we could at least have a discussion to get that going. So that's where the holding statement, putting that in the hands of the reporters so they know at least where to call, who to call, and they understand early we don't have a lot, but they're not tolerant, nor were you and I, after hours and hours and hours of still nothing. So that gets you going. It gets you in the conversation, invited to the party, if you will. And then you become much more responsible to give information at a faster pace once you're in there, because they will continue to come back to you.
One of the things I always tell people is think of it the way athletic teams think about controlling the clock or controlling the ball, more so in basketball and in football. And it's that idea, if a reporter is going to do a live shot for, say, 3 minutes, they can either speculate and play show and tell. I see an ambulance going this way. I see a fire truck going that way, the show and tell type live shot, or they can fill that time with our information. We received this statement, and that first statement's going to fill roughly 60 seconds to 90 seconds. Just for everybody who is a writer, one page is roughly 60 seconds. A page and a half is about 90 seconds. So the ability to control either a script in an edited package or the script in the live shot, to me, is just critical.
Yeah. Well, care and concern is it's not a legal issue. You can get that out there to start with. It's not responsibility. It's care and concern for the situation. So if that's the only thing that you can show, and that you're on scene and you're going to ensure that it's handled as a responsible company would handle it, then you're in the discussion. And that may be the only and the best thing you could say at the time, recognizing the facts of what you do know and the fact that you're there and you recognize that there has been this incident and that is an inconvenience for those that are involved, or whatever the words your company chooses to use. That's the initial, to be in the game. And reporters, obviously, yeah, they'll fill that slot with a speculation if you can't provide them either something they can read or a person. And we did that. We did several live shots in the neighborhood. And that was also a challenge, because people, they're scared. They don't want to go do that. They don't think I can't do that if I don't know all the information. And we would say, you know enough information to do that, to be part of this. Otherwise, they'll take your story and make it their own. And that's the last thing you need, because now you've completely lost control and you appear to be an outsider trying to work your way back in. And that's never a good position to be in.
How many days did this particular crisis run? And was this JIC different than your Yellowstone JIC, or were there similarities?
So the Yellowstone was the official, just like you expect it to be, all the government agencies, all involved from the federal level, state level. The Mayflower incident was much less of that. It was more state officials, state representatives, those with the Arkansas Environmental Protection Agency, very limited. The amount of oil was only about 3,000 barrels spilled. I say it like that, and some will say, well, that's 3,000 barrels, Russ. Yeah, but it's not as big as others could be. So it relatively to our company, any spill is a big spill. To the EPA, that's a major spill. 3,000 barrels is a major spill. So it still required officials be on site. The challenge was this: we have no operations there. We have no location to set up. Our advanced teams, one of the best in the nation, they had to find a warehouse sufficient to hold upwards of 75 to 80 people just from our company. So an old warehouse, I think a farmer had it, hadn't been used in a while. Who knows what was in there before? But within 24 hours, our team had gone through, cleaned it out, set up tables, power. They had the whole thing decked out, ready to go. And we had separate areas to get into. Challenge there was just getting to the location, getting engaged, and then letting the agencies know where we were and bringing them to us, bringing the media to us. Because let's be clear, if you set up shop somewhere, that's your central location. That needs to be where you want to do business. You don't do it in the neighborhood. You move yourself away from the incident to where you can be away from the angry residents and also the looky-loos and all the rest. So not too far of a distance, but enough to have an operation that you could maintain some physical separation and also be able to have a large enough space to have people. And we did. We invited state officials. We had the governor's office there multiple times. We had Environmental Protection Agency from a state representative level there because we had water impacts to Lake Conway. A challenge in and of itself, when you don't have an operations space, I think in Montana, we had government offices that they gave us access to within a building. So it was convenient for the government and allowed them a lot more leeway when it came to making decisions on things. This case, an old retrofit barn or warehouse of some kind. I'm not sure what it was, but weeks, we were there in shifts. And that's probably the next question you're going to ask me is how do you handle staffing on these longer term incidents? Because a 2-day, you can run people for 36 to 48 hours. Not the greatest, but you can make it happen. You try that on 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 2 months, you're really asking for trouble.
Yeah, those first few hours, so many people want to be on deck, and you really have to establish a sleeping pattern early on. It's kind of like when you have that new baby. One parent's up feeding the baby, the other parent needs to be asleep. So take us through the challenge of getting people rested, changing the shifts. And while you do that, also walk us through the process of picking the spokesperson, who should be the spokesperson at what level, and how frequently you should do the news conferences in a long-term JIC type event.
All right, that's three there. Hold me. I'll make sure I get all three of them in. I know a lot of the folks that are on today watching aren't in large organizations, and they've got limited people that they can call on. So that in and of itself is a challenge. We can address that at the end if we have time. But from a large scale organization, one of the lessons that we learned and really put to heart was let's say you have your 10 starters on a team and you have your second and third string. The inclination on a big incident is to send the 10 starters at first and run them for a week and then bring in string 2 and string 3. Our learnings were that it's best to divide those up and give your starting team a bit of a break. So 2 or 3 of the ones available that are your first string best people, get them out there with some number 2s and 3s. And then after that first week, send that next group of starters again. So you have experience and you have energy and you have a third level of folks that are learning and can be doers. That'll take 3-4 weeks, and you can rotate. People get rest, and you're more effective because your more experienced people aren't all completely spent after the first 36 or 48 hours, even a week. So I was there for a week, and believe me, I wanted to stay for another week. And they said, you're coming home. You got to get some rest. We're bringing in the group 2, also just as experienced as me, doing the same kind of work. I got home rested, came back again, and we were much more effective because our heads were clear. So lesson 1, don't send all your best people first. Try to stagger them slightly, if you can. Spokespeople, when you're in a situation like this, it is tempting to escalate to the highest levels. But at the beginning of an incident, especially of this size, we used our incident commander, who was someone who was probably second in control for the company for that region. So not a lightweight, not the president of the company, but number 2, an EVP or a senior vice president, who also worked in shifts, but they were there first. They were the spokesperson. As we learn more, we could escalate, typically in major incidences, major spills, fatalities. That's when you escalate more quickly. In this case, there was nothing other than environmental damage. So we picked that level and we kept it at that level. It did escalate to the president of the company when more discussions came in at the higher levels, and they would be interacting with the governor or with state senators or U.S. senators who were interested in learning more to carry up line. That's 2. What was the third? We got spokespeople. We got stair-stepped.
Yeah, and just that whole rotation of people. I think you really covered all 3 of them in your answer. The spokespeople is something I always get asked about. And what I always suggest to people is well-trained public relations people can handle those early news conferences when we don't have to get into the nuance of the details, because the responders and the incident commanders need to be putting on the fire suit or the moon suit or the cleanup suit. We don't have time to take them away. Too many companies, I find, say only one person can be the spokesperson, and that's the CEO. And I think that is so flawed because the CEO needs to be managing the crisis, not managing the media. I think Tony Hayward during the BP Gulf oil spill was a perfect example of someone who should not be the spokesperson. He was not a good spokesperson, and 87 days into it, he committed the mortal sin of saying the wrong thing and everything went south. So I'm a big fan of PR person first, subject matter expert, and then CEO for empathy if there's a huge impact to the community or if we have injuries, fatalities, or missing. That's kind of the point at which I'm going to bring out a CEO. The other question I asked you was, with the JIC, how frequently did you actually have news conferences? How many times during the day do you think an organization needs to have that JIC news conference?
Sure. So I'll go both incidents. Mayflower being more of a state-run type of response, and the Silvertip or the Yellowstone being much more of a federal response. I want to say we started off with a 10 a.m. and a 3 p.m. on the federal, so 2 a day. A lot of information, a lot of players all needing some FaceTime and some airtime. You go to Mayflower, Arkansas, much smaller incident. I think we ran one. At the beginning, we did maybe a 10 and a 2, and then we just shifted to a 2 o'clock each day, which gave reporters plenty of time to gather what they needed to for their 5, 6, and 10, encourage live shots, things like that, for them to be there and on site, understanding their needs. That probably ran on a regular basis for a week or so, but you don't feel obligated to do a news conference all the time. That's for large pieces of information that are coming out. Media availability is just as successful once you get past the big push of what you found. So amount of barrels of oil, impact, who you're working with, which agencies are cooperating, how it's all working together. That needs to be part of a news conference. Updates along the way, you can make media availability. You could do a small presser with just your spokesperson. She could come out and give a statement, which she did multiple times, and really began to become a resource as the incident took more shape, right? So it's crazy at the beginning. No one knows much of it, and it starts to kind of work its way in. You get some bookmarks on both sides, and then you now know about how much oil, where it's contained, how much is moving, what the impacts are. It's really then what you're doing about it, not what happened or why it happened. You push it to how we're addressing the issue, what things we're doing. Are we purchasing homes? What's that look like? Who do you contact? How much oil has been recovered? How are we doing in the rescue of any protected wildlife? And what does that look like? That becomes the week 2, week 3. The reason Mayflower was longer is because we were in a waterway impact that had affected environmental species, and you had a pipeline. PHMSA came in and they wanted to be sure that there was restrictions on when we could restart the line, even though it was repaired. That became a huge legal battle and a government back and forth in DC. And when that becomes the next piece, it's less about the spill, it's more about the operations and what you're carrying. So it became a different story.
And sometimes I find that really an update can be as simple as a bullet point and 1 or 2 sentences on your website. I think too many organizations fail to properly use their own website as their hub for information. Especially today, I find too many companies try putting things on Facebook or Twitter where there then ensues a public discussion about your statement rather than just sending the smart people, as I call it, over to a website with a single statement. Sometimes you don't need to give more than a bullet point.
I like that way of describing it, because when you fashion a news release, it triggers a lot of required distribution and required approvals, and lawyers look at that differently than they look at a single fact point. Now, they're still going to be sure that you're caring for the company's reputation when you put that out, but it's much faster to get 2 updated bullet points through an approval system than it is an entire fashioned news release with a quote and all those things. It just carries a different level of importance within the company and externally. In fact, in some of the drills we would do, we as a team, trying to be as proactive as we could, actually instituted into some of the drills in the JIC format these bullet points. And it really refreshed the thought process of the leadership team, because they said, where's the next press release? Don't have one. That's at 4:00. Just need approval for these bullet points. Well, where's the press release? We're not doing a press release until 4:00. Just bullet updates so we can stay ahead of it. Once they got the value of that, they became better, because they knew it would only take me 5 minutes to look at 2 bullet points, where I've got to stop my meeting, especially if I'm the incident commander, to read a press release. And I have to read it carefully. And I have to have my lawyer look at it. Got to be super sure that if my name's on this, it's right. But if bullets, that's basically for the press team to take out to the external audience, however you choose to share it, to be sure the story is kept on track, as we would call it. Information's power, and we like to provide as much as possible, even small bits. Keep us in that conversation. And that's the leave behind. If you hear nothing else today, be sure you find a way to stay in the conversation. Be able to be contacted, to respond, to give information out, whether it's in writing or over the phone or however you choose to do it within your training system. Don't get out of the conversation. That you'll lose quickly when you do that.
Excellent stuff. I really appreciate your time. Any final thoughts, anything that we missed that you need to touch on?
I like to tell the public relations team out there 2 things. If you have a lawyer, be sure they understand that you're not trying to cause them problems. It's really a joint effort. If you can achieve that, it'll be wonderful. And then secondly, understand from the media standpoint that if you vilify them early on, it will become a problem throughout. They're simply doing the job. You may not like the questions they ask, but if you can provide them the information that you know they're going to ask for early on, then the chances are really good. They'll understand that you get where they're coming from, and you'll never be their friend. You don't want to be their friend. You just want to be a respectable information resource. So again, stay in the conversation. Once you're out, it's doubly hard to get back in.
Russ Roberts, excellent stuff. Great wisdom, man. I appreciate your time. Good catching up with you.
You as well. Have a blessed day.
All right. See you. Bye. All right. Good stuff from Russ Roberts. We're going to take some questions in a minute. There's a chat section if you want to add some information. Among the takeaways that I wanted to give you on a slide so that you can see these, the way we organized them is fast, factual, no fluff, gets a statement out fast. So Russ mentioned the golden hour has now become the golden minute. I'm going to say that any organization should be and must get a statement out within 15 minutes or less. And as I mentioned, I'm going to show you in a second how fast you can do it with Situation Hub. But fast, factual, no fluff. Quit writing the way your English teacher taught you to write, and write the way a news person writes, which is single thoughts in single sentences. Have the ability to create a holding statement fast, or as we call it in Situation Hub, a first critical statement. It can be published and put to the web and sent by tweet to a reporter, by email to your employees. It is so critical. When you put out that first statement within 15 minutes or less, your company immediately appears to be competent, and you're moving virtually at the speed of social media. You want a statement to go to the internet where media and intelligent people can find it. I despise Facebook. I know so many of you are married to your Facebook accounts. At some point, I will pry you off of it. We'll talk about that at a later point in time. Manage expectations in those first 15 minutes in that first statement, and manage expectations. How much worse will this get? How soon will it get better? Those are the things I mean when we talk about managing expectations. There is also that information void, and we talked about that in the interview. The media can speculate, or they can read your statement, and that fills the speculation or information void. And then that wins the confidence of the media, and it wins the confidence of the public. Plus, when you get that statement out early and it has pre-written sentences, you're now able to satisfy your legal department. And one of the ways you satisfy the legal department is to let them pre-approve the statements. So here's an example of how that's done. This is the Situation Hub interface, and you'll see 3 boxes: step 1, step 2, step 3. We open step one. That's going to give us probably 75 to 80 different scenarios. So we're going to go through the first critical statement item first, which is the holding statement that Russ talked about. And we're going to show you why getting your lawyers on board in advance is so effective. So again, we've got 80 different events here. This is the chemical company version of it. So we've got a lot of NACD members on board. So we'll demonstrate this. If you want, you can take out your phone and start a timer. Let's see how long it takes to write a first critical statement. So I'm going to open the first critical statement. Everyone begins with a preamble. We'll teach you more about that in media training. We're going to say today there is a fire. We're going to say it started at 12:30. We've got a pull down tab here that we can choose from. We're going to say the fire is ongoing. Submit that answer. Or could this have fatalities? This is a kind of event that could have fatalities. So we'll say yes. But today we're going to say we can confirm there are no fatalities. It's going to ask us, could there be injuries? Let's say yes. But also let's make one person injured today. So we're going to say we can confirm there's one injury, but we can't really release any details. It wants to know, could this be a type of event with somebody missing? Let's say everybody is accounted for. And it's going to want to know from whom we've gotten assistance. So let's say EMS and the fire department, because we have an injury and a fatality. What fire department? My town is Mandeville. So I'm going to say the Mandeville Fire Department. It wants to know, should we give the address? Absolutely. The media want to know. So we're going to say it's 123 Main Street. And do we need to give the name of the building? Yes. Let's say this is our Mandeville location. So it lets us type in that name. Members of the team are still gathering additional facts. We'll give you more details later. Let's say that. This is a fancy sentence that says, don't believe all the junk you see on social media. Rely on official sources. Let's say this. Promises an update in about an hour. The next one says, please bear with us, just courtesy statement. And then we promise to post any updates to our website. And we now have a statement finished. I have 1:50 there. So under 2 minutes. I can now read this. I can edit this. I'm going to write test fire masterclass. And I'm going to save that now that I've reviewed the facts. So technically right now we are in the situation room, and I can now hit an alert button, and that is going to send an alert out to all the members of my crisis management team. So I'm now 2 minutes and 20 seconds in, and I've been able to send an email alert and a text message alert to the primary members of my crisis communications team. So when they all get the message, they're coming here to our situation room. They're going to each log in, and they'll click on the statement, and there is our statement. If I need to let someone else edit it, I release edit rights. If I need to claim edit rights, we're back, and I can claim edit rights, and I can make corrections as necessary. Now, let's say everybody agrees all the facts are correct. Facts are correct. I need to get this on the internet real fast. I'm going to hit this button. It says this will go to the internet, and this is on a page hosted by Situation Hub. And we now have the statement on the internet complete with the company logo. So it's about 15 sentences long. And that's how fast you can do a holding statement. And the lawyers can proof all of the language in advance. And that way you're moving quickly. 3 minutes, 28 seconds here. That is record speed for creating a statement. And that means you're now moving at the speed of social media. So at that speed, we talked again about the golden hour. Fast, detailed statement needs to come after that holding statement. After the first critical statement, you're still in the first hour, hopefully. Hopefully you're not waiting 3 hours and 38 minutes before you get your first statement out. So in my world, in 3 minutes, you could have a statement on the internet. I really want you to at least realistically get it under 15 minutes. But now we're still in the golden hour where you can now do a more detailed statement. So in Situation Hub, you would return to a more detailed fire template that would probably take you 5 to 8 minutes to execute, depending on how many injuries, how many fatalities, how many missing people. If you're using paper documents, again, you're going to go through a slightly longer review process, but you want a more detailed statement out. And each time, make it fast, factual, no fluff. A real critical thing to think of is, can you answer questions before they are asked? So if we know the media are asking who, what, when, where, why, and how, we can answer the factual things, deflect the speculative things regarding the cause, and that will serve you well. Get the statement to the internet as soon as possible. That lets you send a link to that internet site, that website that you have. And if you can't get to your website, you can use the Situation Hub website. But you want to send that link to all of the media. You can send it by text, by email. You can tweet it to them. Tweeting is outrageously effective for media relations. You can send that same link to your employees so they're up to speed. If your customer base needs to know, you can send that internet link to them. And you're moving communications along faster, and you're not wasting time babysitting stupid comments on Facebook, because that's really what I think about it. It's just stupid comments. It's not aiding in the managing of expectations. It's aiding in distracting people from the event at hand. Get that statement up quickly, and then have a news conference. That is so critical. In that first hour, the media will start showing up at your location within 30 minutes. So let's take the script from Situation Hub that's been approved and read that script. This is revolutionizing what I'm doing in media training. I'm no longer teaching people the art of ad lib. I'm no longer teaching people the art of being able to, bridge back to 3 key messages. I'm now training people on the art of a really well-written news release, and we're getting great results with it. Let's go back through the timeline of how these things unfold. So on your first day, on day 1, you can get something to the internet in 15 minutes or less. That's the first thing we want to think about. Next, we want to realize that we can have a news conference within that same hour, as I just mentioned. So hypothetically, let's say this event happens somewhere between 7 and 9 in the morning. We would have an update at midday, somewhere around noon, and then somewhere around late afternoon, and then possibly in the early evening around 7 p.m. So I might have my first news conference at within the first hour of the event, another one perhaps at noon, another one perhaps at 4 p.m., perhaps another one at 7 p.m. Now, when we get to the next day, we don't have to have as many news conferences. We can get by with fewer news conferences. So day 2, still putting statements on the web, train the media and train your audiences and your stakeholders to go to the web for reliable information. And maybe you have a news conference at 9 a.m. or 10 a.m., and then maybe one at 3 to 4. And as Russ mentioned, in a JIC, if you've got 4, 5, 10 different agencies speaking, it can turn into a 1-hour event, which is really time consuming. So give the media enough time to cover it and then edit their story. TV is going to need to move faster. Print online is going to be able to update as they go. Bullet points to a website can be as effective as day 2, day 3 news releases, and help the media meet their deadlines. That's why we picked these times that we're showing you here on the screen. Remember, when you have a joint information command, if it's your crisis, you run the JIC. A weather event is a national event. Someone else is going to run that JIC. It's their JIC. So know who to own it. And all of this should be spelled out for you in your crisis communications plan. If you don't have it in your plan, reach out to me. I have it in every one of my plans, and I'll walk you through that process. Russ had a good point about pacing yourself. Have multiple teams and sleep whenever you can. Make sure people are getting sleep. Now, the story cycle on, let's say, hypothetically, a 1-week event is going to go like this. Day 1, the media will cover what happened. Day 2, they're going to look at the cause and effect. What got damaged? What's the effect of it? And then day 3, they start going into the impact of the story, the human side of the story, putting the faces on the people who are in some way suffering. Day 4, if there are fatalities, turns into the funeral story day. That is a rough day to try to manage the story because emotions are at their highest at that point. Day 5 turns into a story about who's to blame, suspicions about the cause. How could this have happened? Could it have been prevented? How much worse could it have been? Day 6, they start saying, tomorrow will be 1 day since XYZ happened. And then day 7 is almost a rehash of day 6, which is, it's been 1 week. And then the cycle will continue as to investigations and whatnot, and cause and blame, and then attorneys jumping on board once you get into day 8, 9, 10. Be ready for a 1-month recap story, a 6-month recap story, a 1-year recap story. So if you need further information, I'm going to take some questions in a minute. All of my information is on the internet. You can always reach me at 504-908-8188. Today's program is brought to you in part by Exxon and the National Association of Chemical Distributors. I am going to stop sharing the screen for a moment here and come back live to you. And if you have questions, let's go ahead and drop them in the chat and let me know how I can help you. While we're waiting for you to put questions in the chat, if you are a member of the National Association of Chemical Distributors, contact me for special pricing on that. If you are an Exxon customer, you're entitled to additional discounts. I know we've got a lot of folks with banking and universities and utilities. We have special programs for you there. I'm going to put up my contact information so you can schedule time with me. Okay, questions are coming in. How do you manage a fast statement when you need them in several languages? They need to be written in advance in multiple languages, and you need to have people who speak first language in each of the languages that are affected, and have spokespeople trained for that as well. Many times people are translating in real time. That is very difficult because the nuance in the difference of a word. For example, Situation Hub is currently in its current form written primarily for North American English with some nuances accounted for our users who are in Canada. Good question there. Next question. So best to avoid social media like Facebook, where two-way is easier versus a Twitter statement. So here's my beef with the algorithms on Facebook. The algorithms are built against you. And the more people comment, the more people like, the more people share, the more all of their friends get alerts that Bob just commented and Susan just commented, you may want to comment. I don't need people commenting. That is irrelevant to a company that is trying to get actionable information out to an audience. And what I do on a regular basis, and I encourage you to do it, is when a company has a crisis, go to their Facebook page and watch how quickly their primary message is lost in the chatter that is just insane and makes no sense and doesn't advance the cause of knowledge. Manage expectations, give knowledge. We don't at this time need to know what everybody thinks, because so many of the people who are commenting are not even affected by the crisis. All right, so again, I want to thank our sponsors from NACD and Exxon. Here is the link that you can write down. It's my Calendly link for Situation Hub. Make an appointment with me. Let's talk about what your needs are. And if you want to ask questions about crises in general, crisis communications plans, if you want me to get a question to Russ for you, if you want to see Situation Hub in action and find out how it works for your company, grab that calendar link and I will be able to help you. And if you want to reach me by email, you can email me at info@situationhub.com or call me at 504-908-8188. It is May Day. May Day 2023. That's a look at how to manage a long-term crisis. I am Jared Bro. I greatly appreciate you being here. I will see you probably in 25 days when we take a look at how to deal with workplace shootings. Thanks for being here. Have a great month.